I'm Jeremy. Today's day 282 of reading. Today we're reading Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Let's get started. Please give this video views. How have I been getting 0 views? Okay, anyways, we're on page 413. Let's go. Roger Davies. When they had disappeared, Ron stood straight again and stared over the head of the crowd. "Where is Hermione?" he said again. A group of Slytherins came up the steps from their dungeon common room. Malfoy was in the front. He was wearing dress robes of black velvet with a high collar, which in Harry's opinion made him look like a vicar. Pansy Parkinson, in very frilly robes of pale pink, was clutching Malfoy's arm. Crabbe and Goyle were both wearing green. They resembled moss-colored boulders, and neither of them, Harry was pleased to see, had managed to find a partner. The oak front doors opened, and everyone turned to look as Durmstrang students entered with Professor Karkaroff. Crumb at the front of the party, accompanied by a pretty girl in blue robes, right in the front of the castle, had been transformed into a sort of grotto full of fairy lights, meaning hundreds of actual living fairies were sitting in the rose bushes that had been conjured there, and fluttering over the statues of what seemed to be Father Christmas and his reindeer. Then Professor McGonagall's voice called, "Champions, over here, please." Parvati had readjusted her bangles, beaming. She and Harry said, See you in a minute," to Ron and Padma, and walked forward, the chattering crowd parting to let them through. Professor McGonagall, who was wearing dress robes of red tartan, had arranged a rather ugly wreath of thistles around the brim of her hat, told them to wait on one side of the doors while everyone else went inside. They were to enter the Great Hall in procession when the rest of the students had sat down. Fleur Delacour and Roger Davies stationed themselves nearest the doors. Davies looked so stunned by his good fortune in having Fleur for a partner that he could hardly take his eyes off her. Cedric and Cho were close to Harry, too. He looked away from them so he wouldn't have to talk to them. His eyes fell instead on the girl next to Crumb. His jaw dropped. It was Hermione. But she didn't look like Hermione at all. She had done something with her hair. It was no longer bushy, but sleek and shiny, and twisted up into an elegant knot at the back of her head. She was wearing robes made out of floaty periwinkle blue material, and she was holding herself differently, somehow, or maybe it was merely because of the absence of 20 or so books she usually had slung over her back. She was also smiling, rather nervously. It was true, but the reduction in the size of her front teeth was more noticeable than ever. Harry couldn't understand how he hadn't spotted it before. "Hi, Harry," she said. "Hi, Parvati." Parvati was gazing at Hermione in unflattering disbelief. She wasn't the only one either. When the doors to the Great Hall opened, Crumb's fan club from the library stalked past, throwing Hermione looks of deepest loathing. Pansy Parkinson gaped at her as she walked by with Malfoy, and even he didn't seem to be able to find an insult to throw at her. Ron, however, walked right past Hermione without looking at her. Once everyone else was settled in the hall, Professor McGonagall told the champions and their partners to get in line in pairs and to follow her. They did so, and everyone in the Great Hall applauded as they entered and started walking up toward a large round table at the top of the hall, where the judges were sitting. The walls of the hall had been covered in sparkling silver frost, with hundreds of garlands and mistletoe and ivy crossing the starry black ceiling. The house tables had vanished. Instead, there were about 100 smaller, lantern-lit ones, each seating about 12 people. Harry concentrating on not tripping over his feet. Parvati seemed to be enjoying herself. She was beaming around at everyone, steering Harry so forcefully he felt as though he were a show dog she was putting through its paces. He caught sight of Ron and Padma as he neared the top table. Ron was watching Hermione pass with narrowed eyes. Padma was looking sulky. Dumbledore smiled happily as the champions approached the top table, but Karkaroff wore an expression remarkably like Ron's as he watched Crumb and Hermione draw nearer. Ludo Bagman, tonight in robes of bright purple and large yellow stars, was clapping as enthusiastically as any of the students, and Madame Maxime, who had changed her usual uniform of black satin for a flowing gown of lavender silk, was applauding them politely. But Mr. Crouch, Harry suddenly realized, was not there. The fifth seat at the table was occupied by Percy Weasley. When the champions and their partners reached the table, Percy drew out the empty chair beside him. Staring pointedly at Harry, Harry took the hint and sat down next to Percy, who was wearing brand new navy blue dress robes and an expression of such smugness that Harry thought it ought to be fine. "I've been promoted," Percy said before Harry could even ask, and from his tone, he might have been announcing his election as the supreme ruler of the universe. "I am now Mr. Crouch's personal assistant, and I am here representing him." "Why didn't he come?" Harry asked. He wasn't looking forward to being lectured on cauldron bottoms all through dinner. "I'm afraid to say Mr. Crouch isn't well. Not well at all. Hasn't been right since the World Cup. Hardly surprising. Overwork. He's not as young as he was, though still quite brilliant. Of course, mine remains as great as it ever was. But the World Cup was a fiasco for the whole ministry. And then Mr. Crouch suffered a huge personal shock with the misbehavior of that house elf of his, Blinky, or whatever she was called. Naturally, he dismissed her immediately afterward. But, well, as I say, he's getting on. He needs looking after, and I think he's found a definite drop in his home comfort since she left. And then we had to deal with the tournament arrange, and the aftermath of the cup to deal with. That revolting Skeeter woman buzzing around? No, poor man, he's having a well-earned quiet Christmas. I'm just glad he knew he had someone he could really rely upon to take his place. Harry wanted very much to ask whether Mr. Crouch had stopped calling Percy Weatherby yet, but resisted the temptation. There was no food as yet on the glittering golden plates, but the small menus were lying in front of each of them. Harry picked his up uncertainly and looked around. There were no waiters. Dumbledore, however, looked carefully down at his own menu, then said very clearly to his plate, "Pork chops." And pork chops appeared. Getting the idea, the rest of the table placed their orders with their plates, too. Harry glanced up at Hermione to see how she felt about this new and more complicated method of dining. Surely it meant plenty of extra works for the house elves, but for once, Hermione didn't seem to be thinking about Spoo. She was deep in talk with Victor Crumb and hardly seemed to notice what she was eating. Spoo. I should not have said Spoo. S-P-E-W. Totally. It now occurred to Harry that he had never actually heard Crumb speak before, but he certainly was talking now, and very enthusiastically at that. "Well, we have a castle also, not as big as this, nor as comfortable, I am thinking." He was telling Hermione, "We have just 4 floors, and the fires are lit only for magical purposes. But we have grounds larger even than these, though in the winter we have very little daylight, so we are not enjoying them. But in summer, we are flying every day, over the lakes and the mountains." Now, Victor," said Karkaroff with a laugh that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Don't go giving away anything else, or your charming friend will know exactly where to find us." Dumbledore smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Eager, all this secrecy. One would almost think you didn't want visitors." "Well, Dumbledore," said Karkaroff, displaying his yellowing teeth to their fullest extent, "we are all protective of our private domains, are we not? Do we not jealously guard the hall of learning that has been entrusted to us? Are we not right to be proud that we alone know our school's secrets, and the right to protect them? I would never dream of assuming I know all Hogwarts secrets, Eager," said Dumbledore amicably. "Only this morning, for instance, I took a wrong turning on the way to the bathroom and found myself in a beautifully proportioned room I have never seen before, containing a rather magnificent collection of chamber pots. When I went to investigate more closely, I discovered that the room had vanished, but I must keep an eye out for it. Possibly it is only accessible at 5:30 in the morning, or it may only appear at the quarter moon, or when the seeker has an exceptionally full bladder." Guys, please remember this. this has something very important to do with the next book. Harry snorted into his plate of goulash. Percy frowned, but Harry could have sworn Dumbledore had given him a very small wink. Meanwhile, Fleur Delacour was